So before we get to all the nitty gritty, I'd love to be able to just introduce myself a bit and why I'm doing what I'm doing. When you hear my introduction, you hear all the achievements and the books and all the things. But before I was ever a doctor or an author, I was a patient. And that's really where my journey started. I was first diagnosed with a disease called lupus when I was 16 years old. So lupus is an autoimmune disease. It's a disease where your own immune system, well, basically gets confused. And instead of just attacking foreign invaders like, viruses and bacteria, or rushing to the rescue when you slam your knee into the corner of your bed or something like that, and putting in mediators that can repair damage, well, it starts instead attacking your own tissues. And so there are different kinds of autoimmune diseases that basically are organized or categorized by what tissues you get attacked. It's one of the top 25 causes of death in women in general, but one of the top 5 causes of death in women of color. So I ended up getting into a kidney biopsy, and only a few days later I was seeing a doctor. So basically what he said is, this is so aggressive and it's already progressed far enough that we think you have about 6 months. And we were like, 6 months for what? And he says 6 months till complete kidney failure. If we don't do something about it, your best hope is dialysis, but there's a chance you might not make it. And so that was how he sold me on, well, the current meds we have, and this was before Plaquenil, guys. This is before all the new meds that we had, the newfangled meds, and they said it's not gonna work for you. We have an experimental treatment where we're trying to use chemotherapy to suppress people's immune systems so that we can stop the progression of disease. Every time they tried to stop the chemo, then I would start to have the kidney function would go down again and the lupus would get worse again. So for 2 years, I was on 60 milligrams of prednisone, very high dosage of prednisone. I was on the chemotherapy that was increasing every month. But again, I focused on joy and passion. I studied, I still graduated at the top of my class. I got a scholarship to my first choice of college, and I got to finish chemo a week before I went to college. So it was like, best time ever in my life.
Wow.
I finished chemo, I started college, and it was just like studying without chemo was so much easier. I did get sick again, and I developed blood clots. My doctors were very clear with me that between kidney failure and the blood clotting disease, I could never have children, that I was at major risk for a stroke, and that I had to take blood thinners for the rest of my life. So they gave me the injectable blood thinners, but don't hit your head because you could also bleed into your head. As sick as I was, I always came back. I never gave up on my life and my future, but no one had ever told me there was anything you could do, especially everything that you could eat, that would change anything. And I had made peace with that. I was definitely overweight. I wasn't getting in all of my workouts I needed. Now, I had stopped eating meat. I was a vegetarian since I was 13. So I ate tons of dairy and eggs all day long. Like, I lived on dairy and eggs and processed junk and French fries, okay? But I didn't eat any meat. So I did his program, and I didn't even realize that I was being vegan. I didn't have a word for it. I was just eating lots of raw foods and lots of water. I was drinking oil for omega-3 and exercising. And what I found was, when it worked, 3 months later, I was, here we are at our wedding 3 months later.
Oh, wow.
This was in Hawaii. I know he looks good too, but like, but not only did I feel amazing, but it was the first time, I was 28 years old, and it was the first time in 12 years that I had no lupus symptoms out of the blue. I actually got my blood test drawn from a new doctor. I had just moved to California. The doctor thought there was a lab mistake because he got my history, and the labs were negative for lupus, which has never happened. I had lupus for 12 years. They tested me every month because I was scary as a patient, and yet these were negative. So he said, go enjoy your wedding, come back, we'll retest you. And we came back and I got retested and they were still negative. And on top of that, they retested my blood clotting antibodies and they were borderline when they'd always been high. I never considered it was my diet because I never learned diet had an impact on lupus. And so after 4 years of being completely lupus free with normal labs, we decided to go ahead and do what else they thought was impossible. And I got pregnant with our first son, Solomon, because if I was able to be lupus free for 4 years and have a child with no relapse, then there was something that we did that changed it. How does nutrition affect cellular function, cellular repair, immune function? And we realized that we had accidentally created what really is the most anti-inflammatory diet really possible by accident. I'd never heard of plant-based, none of that. It just kind of happened. So I published a lot of stuff. I published getting people off the kidney transplant list. I recently just published another case series of people free from lupus and Sjogren's Symptom-free between 2 to 6 weeks, still symptom-free in awful medicines 3, 6, and 7 years later. We also have seen many cases that have shown that plant-based diets can prevent COVID. There was one study that a British medical journey, plant-based 73% lower risk, but high protein, 48% higher risk, right? On top of that, there was a Harvard study, again, plant-based diets lowered COVID risk. A Brazilian study, plant-based diets lowered COVID risk. Why is that? Well, Johns Hopkins figured some things out. They found that there's an ingredient in raw cruciferous vegetables that prevents viruses from replicating. You got to read all this stuff. This is for doctors doing their grand rounds, but listen, it stops the virus from replicating and lowers inflammation in the lungs, which is probably why they don't get the severe COVID. It also has been shown to prevent cancer from forming and spreading, right? This is an ingredient in cruciferous vegetables. I've also had every single client with long COVID recover completely, usually within 3 weeks. So what can a healthy immune system do? A few things. It can reverse disease, it can fight disease, and it can recover from disease, right? Like that's what all of us should be able to do. The first thing you have to do is eliminate the stuff making you sick, right? If you want to get well, you shouldn't need to get sick, right? It's like my husband always jokes, you want the secret to fat loss? Stop getting fatter, right? That's one, right? You want to stop getting sick? You stop eating the things that make you sicker. Now, most of the time you hear about how these things cause things like heart disease. And actually the new studies on processed foods show that eating even one serving of processed foods a day can raise your risk of dying from heart disease by over 50% and any disease by over 20%. And of course, oils besides things like omega-3 oils like flaxseed oil. But all the animal products, I'm sure you've learned the heart disease versions of this. For the immune system, I want you to understand that the immune system is created by something called arachidonic acid. And when you eat a lot of the products that have it, you increase the activity of these enzymes, okay? These enzymes then create these different parts of your inflammatory immune system, leukotriene B4, thromboxane E2, prostaglandin E2. What matters is these are important for creating the inflammation you need, but when this system becomes too high, it starts to cause some problems. So 5-LOX is associated with cell growth, right? Which is important, but with too much cell growth, you get cancer, right? Now, if you have too much of the 5-LOX, you're gonna have too much leukotriene B4, which is associated with all these different inflammatory illnesses. COX-1 is involved in blood clots, right? So if you have too much COX-1, you're gonna have too many heart attacks and strokes. That's why you get COX-1 inhibitors like aspirin, trying to stop this when really we need to stop this, right? And then when it comes to COX-2, that's involved in many things, but also vascular proliferation. If you have too much blood supply, you're going to have too much blood supply to cancer, and too much prostaglandin E2, again, cancer, inflammatory bowel disease, chronic pain. So I show you this because when we look at how to fix yourself, you need to add nourishment, or what I call hypernourish. I intentionally overdose people in the nutrients their body uses to repair themselves, right? And what happens is what you saw before. But one of the big focuses is raw vegetables. If you want to hypernourish, you should get about a pound a day of cruciferous vegetables, or dark leafy greens like spinach. It's not cruciferous, but it can hang with cruciferous. It's got some pretty good stuff in it, but it's very, very important. Why raw vegetables? Well, one, the clinical results are proven. I have a lot of people who come to me who are on plant-based diets where they're mostly eating beans, rice, and like potatoes, and they still have autoimmune symptoms. So we've got to make sure that you're not only avoiding the stuff that make you sicker, but give your body the stuff that it uses to repair damage, vitamins, minerals, antioxidants, oh my, right? All these things are necessary. And if you're not getting them, you're not going to repair damage, right? And those of you who are sick, you've got enough damage to feel it at 100 trillion cells. You need to hypernourish. On top of that, that sulforaphane, I just showed you all about the sulforaphane that is killing cancer cells and that's killing viruses in your body. Well, as soon as you cook it, that level goes down. Also, when you cook things like kale, prostaglandin E2 levels, they're only reduced when you consume raw kale. And remember, prostaglandin E2, remember that one, right? Was, let me see, right there. So just eating these vegetables in their raw form, not only am I seeing the results clinically, but this research is starting to catch up as to why it's a problem. Because as soon as you start cooking it, you're losing some of these really important markers. It doesn't mean you can't eat it cooked, but you're not gonna get the same benefit. And since the soil is so bad nowadays, it's already less nutrients in the produce there used to be, we gotta optimize what we can get, right? So, The other thing that you need to focus on is your water intake. People don't pay enough attention. They're all looking for some magic herbal tea that's going to fix their problem. But you need water for metabolism. As soon as you're mildly dehydrated, it affects exercise performance, your brain function. Some people have brain fog. They don't know it's from dehydration. It also causes constipation, low energy. And this is what people take meds for, right? They are spending money at Starbucks and buying laxatives and taking ibuprofen when all they really need is to drink their water. And the final one that you need to be aware of is omega-3s. There is way too much going on here where people are becoming plant-based and becoming fat phobic because they hear about the high cholesterol and then they start thinking everything that has a fat is bad, and it's just not true. And it's dangerous because we need certain fats for our function. One, for metabolism. Okay, omega-3 should be a part of your cells. It lets nutrients in and it lets toxins out. If you're omega-3 deficient, your body will use those omega-6s and you'll get rigid cells that can't do their job. All right, so if you're eating, all these things plant-based and you're exercising and you can't lose weight, one, make sure you're drinking enough water. Two, make sure you're getting omega-3s so that you get the cell signals to happen. They're also important for brain function, but that's just an extra. But what I'm here to tell you about is your immune system. So just like those omega-6 fatty acids create your inflammatory immune system, the omega-3s create the anti-inflammatories. So I'm just gonna, again, don't try to memorize this. This is just to show you what the pathway looks like. And hopefully you notice it's very similar to the pathway I showed you before. So similar that I'm going to put them side by side just to show you something cool, okay? This is how I hack people's health. Now, here's inflammatory immune pathway and anti-inflammatory immune pathway, a simplified version, okay? So what happens is these two areas, have any of you ever heard that you can't break down flax seeds into enough anti-inflammatory immune cells? People say that all the time. The reason that happens is because this enzyme breaks both of these pathways down, but it prefers this pathway. So if you're still eating vegetable oils and animal fats and processed foods, then yes, you're not going to break down as much of these ALA as you should. But if you take that out, bam, pow, 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 you can absolutely make sufficient amounts of EPA, DHA. Cool thing about this, right, is that when you get high amounts of this, it actually stops the breakdown of arachidonic acid. So you can create more anti-inflammatory power by taking this stuff out. So how do you do it? Well, one thing you can do is you can eat meals. These are all from my new book, Goodbye Lupus, Hello Delicious. It's all raw meals. And every single recipe in that book came from someone who healed on my program. So it's actually a book of recipes that healed real people, which I think is super cool. Or they're from me, who also healed on these recipes. Or there's recipes from my son Alex who wouldn't have existed without these recipes. You can make raw delicious and exciting. I know Dr. Montgomery has a clinic with a cafe that makes you all sorts of amazing raw foods. So you can make it fun or you can make it simple. I like simple. I literally just drink these all day so I can stay nourished and hyperactive on all the nutrition without having to sit and eat. And I always tell people, listen, I have seen heart failure in a 35-year-old with cocaine addiction, but I've seen more people dying from their food addiction. In fact, the #1 cause of death, as you know, right, is food addiction, causing heart disease, causing heart attacks, right, cancers, diabetes. So the hardest part of my job is not telling people what to eat, it's getting them to do it. And that's where I'm good because I know how to work through self-sabotage, food addictions, trauma, depression, anxiety. So that's the majority of my work on a daily basis because the food is simple.
Keep up the great work and we look forward to working with you in the future.
All right, keep in touch, all right? I am expecting to have that smoothie with you, so we could do some really cool things together. Yes.
That's your number. I'll send you mine.
Okay, perfect. Thanks everybody for coming tonight.
Y'all have a good evening.
Thank you.